A 1952 Black Phantom sold at auction for $5,400, double its estimate. 7 brands died. Their bikes refused to follow. One name here burned through $189 million before the lights went out. Nishiki, $150. That is the average asking price for a bike that once rolled out of one of the most respected factories in Japan. Nishiki launched in 1965 under a different name, American Eagle, created by a California outfit called West Coast Cycle. The founders, Leo and Rosabelle Cohen, needed a way to bring quality Japanese manufacturing to American bike shops at prices that undercut European imports. Their solution was a partnership with Kawamura Cycle, based in Kobe, Japan. Kawamura built frames from chromoly steel tubing, fitted them with Suntour and Shimano drivetrains, and shipped them across the Pacific with a level of finish that surprised dealers who expected cheap imports. The Nishiki International and the Olympic became staples of weekend club rides and entry-level racing through the 70s and 80s. At their peak, Nishiki bikes matched or outperformed competing models priced hundreds of dollars higher. But the success attracted attention from larger companies. Production shifted from Kawamura in Kobe to Giant in Taiwan, and the hand-built quality that defined the early years started to slip. West Coast Cycle was eventually absorbed by a larger distributor, and without an identity to protect, the Nishiki name quietly disappeared from bike shop floors. Today, high-end models like the Nishiki Prestige still fetch $300 to $500 from collectors who remember when Kobe craftsmanship meant something. The rest sit in garage sales, waiting for someone to notice the eagle on the head badge. But Nishiki was not the only brand caught between two continents. Across the Atlantic, a French icon had already collapsed under the same pressure a full decade earlier. Motobecane, founded in 1923 and dead by 1981. 58 years of French cycling heritage, wiped out in a single decade of financial decline. Motobecane, a name built by combining the French words for motor and bike, started as a manufacturer of bicycles, mopeds, and motorcycles in France. For decades, the company defined what an affordable racing bike could be. The problem Motobecane solved was access. In the post-war years, European workers needed lightweight, durable transportation that did not cost a month's wages. Motobecane delivered exactly that, using hand-brazed lugged Mapleton axle frames built from Reynolds 531 and Columbus tubing, paired with Campagnolo or Simplex components. The Grand Record, their flagship road model, offered professional-grade geometry at a fraction of what an Italian racing frame would cost. The Le Champion and the Super Mirage earned a reputation among American riders during the bike boom of the 1970s, when dealers could not keep French 10-speeds on the floor, but the economics turned. The French franc strengthened, Japanese manufacturers offered comparable quality at lower prices, and Motobecane's parent company ran out of room to maneuver. The brand went under in 1981. Yamaha Motor Company acquired the remains, mostly for the moped division. Here is where the story gets strange. Today, a company called Motobecane USA, based in the United States, sells bikes under the same name. Those bikes are manufactured in Taiwan by Kinesis Industry. The two companies share a name and nothing else. A vintage Grand Record in original paint with French componentry now sells for $400 to $800. The Taiwanese version retails for a similar price. Brand new, same badge, entirely different lineage. What happened to Motobecane in France happened to another giant in the United States, but the cause was not a strong currency. It was a philosophy too far ahead of its time. Bridgestone, 50%. That is the premium a Grant Peterson-designed Bridgestone commands over a comparable vintage road bike on the resale market. Bridgestone, known globally as one of the largest tire manufacturers on Earth, ran a bicycle division out of its factories in Japan for decades. In the mid-1980s, the company hired Grant Peterson, a hardcore cyclist with strong opinions and zero patience for industry trends, to lead its United States division.
Peterson's approach was radical for the time.
While the rest of the industry chased lighter components and flashier paint, he built bikes around ride quality, comfort, and durability. The Bridgestone RB1, the crown jewel of the Peterson era, used frame geometry borrowed from classic Italian road bikes of the 70s, paired with Japanese workmanship and reliable functional parts. At its peak, the RB1 competed with racing bikes costing hundreds of dollars more and held its own on the circuit. Peterson pushed further. The XO series put drop handlebars on mountain bike frames, years before gravel bikes existed. The MB series challenged assumptions about what a mountain bike needed to be, but the corporate culture in Japan grew uncomfortable with Peterson's refusal to follow trends. When the dollar weakened against the yen in the early 90s, making imports expensive, Bridgestone Japan pulled the plug on its United States division in 1994. Peterson walked away and founded Rivendell Bicycle Works, where he continues to build bikes the way he always wanted, without corporate interference.
The original Bridgestone RB1 frames now sell for $300 to $800, sought after by riders who understand that a bike designed to be ridden hard for decades is worth more than one designed to be replaced in 3 years.
One American engineer understood that principle before Peterson did, and he built an entire company around it. That company ended up swallowed whole by its biggest competitor, Klein.
An MIT graduate designed the frame in 1975. By 2009, the brand no longer existed.
Gary Klein studied engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and came away with a conviction that aluminum could outperform steel if the tubes were large enough to resist flex. At the time, alloy frames were considered heavy and unreliable. Klein's oversized tubes, years before anyone else dared to try them, produced frames that were lighter and stiffer than almost anything on the market. The paint jobs became legendary, multi-layered fades and gradients that turned every Klein into a piece of functional art. But Klein was a small operation in Chehalis, Washington, and the company could not scale fast enough to compete with the giants. In 1995, Trek purchased the brand. The Chehalis factory closed in 2002. Production moved to Trek's headquarters in Waterloo, Wisconsin, and the bikes lost the qualities that made them special. By 2009, Trek retired the Klein name entirely. Today, collectors draw a hard line between pre-Trek and post-Trek Kleins. Frames built in the original Chehalis factory command premiums of $500 to $2,000 or more, while post-move models sell for a fraction of that. The paint is almost always the tell. Now, into the top 3. And the next brand on this list did not die slowly. It exploded. If this kind of deep dive into cycling history is landing, consider subscribing. There is more of this coming, and the top 3 entries on this list get significantly more dramatic. The brand at number 1 lost its founding family a century of work for $2.5 million. Vanmoof. $189 million in total funding. That is the number Vanmoof, a Dutch electric bike startup, raised before declaring bankruptcy in July 2023. This is the open loop from the intro, and the full story is worse than the number suggests. Founded in Amsterdam in 2009 by brothers Taco and Thijs Carlier, Vanmoof built sleek, minimalist e-bikes with integrated anti-theft technology and smartphone connectivity. Tech journalists called it the Tesla of e-bikes. The design was stunning. A battery hidden inside the frame, clean lines, a digital experience that felt more like unboxing a phone than assembling a bicycle. During the pandemic, demand for e-bikes surged globally, and Vanmoof rode the wave. The company expanded aggressively, opening stores in major cities, hiring over 300 additional staff just to handle customer service, and burning cash at a staggering rate. In 2021 alone, Vanmoof posted losses of 80 million euros against revenue of 85 million euros. The bikes themselves became part of the problem. Frequent breakdowns, long repair wait times, and proprietary parts that only Vanmoof technicians could service left a trail of frustrated customers across Europe and the United States. When the company filed for bankruptcy, Amsterdam police reported their phone lines were overwhelmed by angry owners wondering whether their bikes would become expensive paperweights. And in a way, some of them did. Vanmoof's app controlled the digital key that unlocked each bike.
Without that key, a $2,000 e-bike became a very heavy, very expensive coat rack.
A competitor, Cowboy, actually built a separate app to let Vanmoof owners retain access to their own bikes. Resale prices dropped immediately after the bankruptcy announcement, from an average of $1,687 to $1,499. McLaren Applied eventually acquired Vanmoof's assets, but the lesson remains. 190,000 bikes were sold worldwide, and their long-term value depends entirely on whether a parts supply chain survives a company that no longer exists in its original form. Vanmoof collapsed because it tried to reinvent the bicycle for the digital age. The next brand on this list collapsed because it refused to change anything at all, and that stubbornness is exactly what makes its surviving bikes priceless. Hetchins, $5,000. That is the upper range for an original Hetchins frame in good condition, and the wait list for the handful still being built today can stretch for years. The brand traces back to the 1920s, when Hyman Hetchin, a Russian immigrant who fled the Bolshevik Revolution, opened a shop in Tottenham, North London, selling gramophones, records, and eventually bicycles. The turning point came when Hetchin met Jack Denny, a local frame builder, who had been experimenting with a radical design, curved rear stays that snaked where every other frame ran straight. Hetchin recognized the marketing potential immediately. The two partnered up, patented the design in 1934, and the result became one of the most visually distinctive bicycles ever produced. Those curly stays, which Hetchins called the vibrant triangle, were not just decoration. They were designed to absorb road vibration, a rudimentary form of suspension decades before anyone used that word in cycling. On top of the stays, every Hetchins frame featured lugs so intricately hand-cut that each one could take hours to complete.
The magnum opus model, the most ornate of all, turned a bicycle into something closer to sculpture.
Olympic and World Championship victories followed in 1936. Sales peaked at over 600 frames in 1938, all produced by a two-person operation, Hetchin selling, Denny building. The war years slowed production to fewer than 200 frames annually, and the brand never fully recovered its commercial momentum. Hyman's son Alf ran the business until the mid-1980s, when it was sold and merged with Bob Jackson Cycles. Today, roughly 12 Hetchins frames are built per year under the revived name, but collectors focus on the originals. A magnum opus in period-correct condition is a genuine museum piece.
The curly stays and hand-cut lugs are so distinctive that an entire cottage industry of fakes and copies has emerged, and the brand's old slogan acknowledged it directly: copied by some, equaled by none.
And that brings this list to number 1, a brand so dominant, so deeply woven into American life that its bankruptcy should have been impossible. It happened anyway. Schwinn, $2.5 million. That is what the Schwinn family received for 100 years of work when the company went bankrupt in 1992. The name Schwinn was once so synonymous with bicycles in the United States that many Americans used it as a generic word for any bike, the way Kleenex means tissue. Ignaz Schwinn, a German immigrant, founded the company in Chicago in 1895. Over the next century, Schwinn defined nearly every major trend in American cycling. In the 1930s, Frank W. Schwinn introduced balloon-tired children's bikes, front suspension, and the Paramount Racer, a hand-built machine that established the company's reputation for premium quality.
The Black Phantom, launched in 1949, became the heavyweight cruiser that every kid in America wanted, with its spring fork, built-in headlight, horn tank, and chrome fenders.
Then came the Stingray in 1963, inspired by California kids customizing their bikes to look like chopper motorcycles. The Crate series followed in 1968, 5-speed bikes with stick shifts, Springer forks, and banana seats that turned playgrounds into drag strips. An Apple Crate sold for $2,950 at Mecum Auction in 2022. A lemon peeler brought $3,000 at Kopake that same year, and that 1952 Black Phantom in original condition sold for $5,400 at Kopake in October 2025. But Schwinn's leadership made a fatal miscalculation in the 1980s. They refused to embrace the mountain bike revolution, dismissed it as a fad, and declined to manufacture overseas when their competitors slashed production costs by moving to Taiwan and China. By the time Schwinn tried to catch up, it was too late. The company filed for bankruptcy in 1992. A venture capitalist offered to buy the Schwinn name from the family trust in a separate transaction. The amount, $2.5 million, was grudgingly accepted. Richard Schwinn, great-grandson of the founder, purchased the Paramount Design Workshop and reopened it as Waterford Precision Cycles, but the bankruptcy agreement prohibited him from using either the Schwinn name or the Paramount brand. The Schwinn name passed through Scott USA, Quester Partners, another bankruptcy in 2001, Pacific Cycle, Dorel Industries, and finally, Pawn Holdings. Today, Schwinn badges appear on mass-market bikes sold at big-box retailers for a few $100s. The Paramount, once hand-built by the company's most skilled craftsmen in a dedicated workshop, using the finest materials available, no longer exists in any recognizable form. The Chrome Phantoms, the chopper-inspired Crates, and the racing Paramounts exist only in collections, garages, and auction halls, where they routinely sell for more than they cost when new.
A company that once employed thousands and set the direction of an entire industry now survives as a licensed sticker on a frame built halfway around the world.
7 brands, 7 different ways to die. Nishiki lost its identity when production left Kobe for cheaper factories in Taiwan. Motobecane ran out of financial room as currency shifts made French manufacturing unsustainable. Bridgestone was pulled back to Japan when the dollar weakened and the numbers stopped working. Klein was absorbed by the company it could not outrun. Its name retired once Trek extracted the technology it needed. Vanmoof burned through nearly $200 million chasing a digital future that its hardware could not support. Hetchins outgrew its 2-person workshop but never outgrew its craft, surviving as a hand-built relic of a pre-industrial approach. And Schwinn, the most American of bicycle companies, died because it believed its own dominance was permanent. Every brand on this list made something people still want decades later. That is the strange afterlife of a dead company. The factories close, the workers scatter, the logos get licensed to someone new, but the original bikes survive. They survive because steel lasts, because craftsmanship holds value, and because a great design does not care who owns the trademark. The second-hand market is not nostalgic, it is ruthlessly accurate. It prices what matters and ignores what does not. When a Black Phantom sells for $5,400, that is not sentiment. That is a verdict on a century of work, delivered long after the company that did the work ceased to exist. If this landed, subscribe and turn on notifications so the next one does not slip past. That video digs into the specific models from dead brands that are still climbing in value and the ones the collector market has quietly forgotten. Same depth, tighter focus. That one drops soon.